And I said, I wanted to, yes. Well,
Okay, we're ready to get started here. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the sixth program in the 2025 Greystone Viaduct Winter Lecture Series. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out for tonight's program, pulling the thread, untangling, revealing history. Speaking of threads, who remembers the famous slogan for cotton? Anyone? For fabric? The fabric of your life. So I would argue that libraries are the fabric of our communities. In addition to offering programs like these that present local history and community topics, our little bookworm programs incorporate early literacy skills that are crucial for learning reading comprehension and help equip children with lifelong learning and literacy skills that help prepare them for school and beyond. Our summer reading programs help offset the loss of academic achievement students experience during the summer months, also known as summer slide. Our library offers meeting spaces for local organizations and individuals. It partners with Ohio Means Jobs, promoting job opportunities in the Valley. It's a space where people can come and relax, catch up with the news. We've got plenty of newspapers upstairs, or check their email and social media over free Wi-Fi and internet services. You can even get documents notarized free of charge here. We have a notary on staff Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Libraries were as comfortable and practical as cotton, but we don't ship in the dryer. All you regulars were wondering which commercial I was going to rip off this week. You got your answer. So good luck guessing which commercial or which slogan I'll come up with next week. You will have to be here in person to find that out because at the request of our speaker next week, our program will not be live streamed. So if you're waiting on, I know you all are dying to know which commercial I'm going to rip off next week. So you have to be here in person to hear that. Okay, got that out of my system. We will get on to tonight's program soon, but I'd end up with my head on a sleep if I didn't mention our partners in this series, and yes, that is a feeling joke. If you know, you know. It takes two needles to knit, and without the Greystone Viaduct Historical Education Society, we'd be one knitting needle short of being able to present you this rich tapestry of programming every year. So to talk about the knit toward pearl, I'm going to introduce a Greystone Viaduct board member, Dan Frizzy.
Okay, I guess that's one. Thank you all once again for coming to this, our sixth presentation of the season. Well, we see a lot of familiar faces every week. This week, it looks like the weather has been really nice outside, so we may not see some of those faces we've seen at some of our other lectures. I was asked tonight to talk a little bit about one of the major projects that the Viaduct Society is undertaking. Back on the table, you'll find these rack cards. These rack cards are cards that are advertising our caboose project. The Greystone Viaduct Society is located at Old Baltimore, Ohio caboose down in Jackson, Ohio. My wife and I were the first ones that saw that caboose in Jackson. We took some photos of it and brought those photos back, and our board elected to make arrangements to have that caboose moved to Sugar Creek, Ohio, where it's going to be restored to what would be its original condition and its original colors. It'll be painted in the traditional royal blue B&O railroad with yellow trim. One of the things why we're telling you all of this is because taking this caboose from Jackson to Sugar Creek was quite an expense for our organization. We had to have a crane to lift it off of the trucks, the wheel trucks, in Jackson. We had two road vehicles that transported the caboose to Sugar Creek. One with a set of wheel trucks and one with the body of the caboose. And then when we arrived in Sugar Creek, we had to have another crane that was able to lift it off of both of those trucks and reassemble it at the roundhouse. Much of the cost of this project is going to be in transporting the caboose to Sugar Creek and then getting it back here to Bel Air with its finished coat of paint and in its restored condition. So I'd like all of you, if you would, to just pick up one of these rack cards, look at what we're undertaking, and if you'd like to become a gold spike, silver spike, or bronze spike contributor to the fund that will help us bring this caboose back to Bel Air, we encourage you to do so. You can mail this right in to our treasurer, Jim Cochran. He'll be happy to take your money. Isn't that right, Jim? Yes.
What does the caboose weigh?
The caboose weighs 70,000 pounds. It's a steel caboose. It's a bay window caboose. It was built in Kenton, Ohio in 1970. Let's see here. It tells you on here. It was built in Kenton, Ohio back in the 70s. And, I was going to law school up in Ada, Ohio. I drove through Kenton every, weekend or so. And right there is where that caboose is being manufactured while I was going back and forth to law school. So it's a big project that we've undertaken, and we hope that you folks will help support that project. We want to bring it back and have it over at the viaduct as a reception center, welcome center, maybe a Airbnb. We just don't know what we're going to do with it once we get it back here, but we're going to put it to good use, that's for sure. With your help, we can make that possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. We'll get started with the program shortly. I do have to remind everybody at this time to please silence your cell phones. And then I think everybody knows where the bathrooms are, to the hallways to the left. Next week, our program the one that will not be live streamed, so you have to be here to see it. It's Backyard Flora and Fauna of Belmont County with award-winning photographer Daniel Caron. Daniel carries at least one camera with him at all times, whether on outings to new locations or just exploring his backyard. In this presentation, he will connect us to the flora and fauna that reside outside our own doors here in Belmont County. That's next week, Wednesday, March 19th at 6 p.m. Backyard Flora and Fauna of Belmont County with Daniel Caron. And then just before I introduce Christine here, I want to make sure that everybody knows that she's got a few books left here to sell. She's got more in the car, so they were going pretty quickly. Yes. At this program, they're available for $20 a piece. Okay, Christina Fisanick is professor of English at Pennsylvania Western University, California, where she teaches expository writing, digital storytelling, and creative nonfiction. She and her honor students have collaborated for the past decade with the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh to create more than 300 digital stories focusing on Northern Appalachian culture. She's the president of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia and is the co-host of One Alive reading series, a weekly live stream featuring writers from throughout Northern Appalachia. Christina claims she's a writer of most genres and an expert in few, which I think is a very humble self-description. She specializes in creative nonfiction and digital storytelling, but is currently working on a historical novel. She is here tonight to share essays from her most recent publication, Pulling the Thread, Untangling, Revealing History. Please welcome with us tonight, Dr. Christina Fisanick.
Thank you very much, Erin. Do you need to do a sound check? Am I good? Everything good?
It doesn't sound like is your pack on?
Try. Take a look. I feel like, Britney Spears is an old reference. I feel like Taylor Swift.
There we go.
That's right. Is that better than everything? So, thank you, Erin, for having me and for the series for having me. And I never get to come to this series because I almost always teach on Wednesday nights at Carlo University, my side job, when I'm not writing. And I wanted to say a couple things. First, this book would not exist without the Ohio County Public Library online archives, which Aaron had a big role in making sure that we have access. As somebody who is super busy, and I love the library, I wish I could just sit in the library all day, why hasn't somebody paid for that yet? To give me a paycheck to sit in the library in the archives and do the research and write it up. They haven't done that yet, so I have to do it on my own time. And the library has made this book possible. There's no way this book would exist without those online archives. And I'm obviously a big supporter of libraries, and I have a great essay in here that I'm not going to read tonight. That is one of my favorite stories about Wheeling is when we rejected the Carnegie Library in Wheeling because we were very angry, and I wasn't alive then, but I say we because I consider those my people. When the whole homestead strike and the deaths there, and the workers in Wheeling said no way. And I love our little library. It does all the work, just like this library does, of keeping our community together and going forward. A couple more things I want to talk a little bit about the background of this book, and I know it's a Wheeling book, and not everybody here is from Wheeling, but I always tell people that Wheeling history is West Virginia history, it's United States history, and it's world history. I've been, if anybody else has been, to Westminster Abbey, and I've seen the stained glass window that bears the seal of West Virginia, that was paid for by West Virginia. And you can find West Virginia everywhere. You can find the Ohio Valley everywhere. I just took a tour of Island Mold and Machine. I don't know if you know about this business. They've been in business since 1939. They're in Wheeling. They're not on the island anymore. They had to relocate because of flooding. But they are still in existence after all these years, and their roots in Central Glass. And they make molds, one of the last glass mold making companies in the United States. And their molds, they're used by glass companies all over the US and all over the world to create unique glass pieces. Things that you know of. If you know Blanco glass, you know those water pitchers that they sell, those beautiful water vases, that mold was made right in Wheeling at Island Mold Machine. And things that you, I'm certain, have seen on your tables, on people's shelves, were made there. So when we think about local history, we also have to think about regional history, state history, and world history, because people from the Ohio Valley go on and do big things and change the world in a lot of ways. And I always try to reiterate that. It's not just this little tiny place and our history isn't significant, but it is. It's significant to us and to people all over the world. So this book came about because I've always loved history, and although my degrees are all in English, I love the research, and I really, really love Ohio Valley history. And the essay that I'm going to read to you tonight, and I'm sorry if you've heard me read this one before, but it's about Mark Twain's visit to Wheeling. But it's about a lot more than that, and I apologize guys if you've heard me read this one. Other essays in this book, though, before I get started, I have a whole section on Oakley Park history, things that people would not even realize. There's I don't know if you know, but the Civilian Corps of Engineers, the Work Progress Administration, built a lot of the buildings that are at Wheeling, or at Oakley Park, including the Pine Room, that whole structure. All of that was built during the Works Progress Administration. They also built a lot of the original cabins that were there, and people don't realize this either, but the original cabins were built for recycled trolley lines, and so no cabin at Oakley Park was alike when they first built them, because they were all different. They were all shaped differently and built differently. So there's that section, but there's also a section that is more about thinking about the past and how it's relevant to the future, like sitting on the porch, taking Sunday drives, and those things, and how that it's kind of a lost art, or a lost way of being. And I spent some time meditating on, how can we bring that sort of thing back? And then, of course, there's a whole section of essays about outside the city limits of Wheeling, things like the Village of Light, which is the town of Power, West Virginia. Have you been to what remains of Power? It's a very cool story. And there are people, of course, that are still around that live there and grew up there. There's also some stuff in here about indigenous people, and about a crematorium in Washington, Pennsylvania, that has a bunch of writing on the wall that was written by a bunch of Wheeling people in the 1800s. I still don't quite understand how it got there, but I'm trying to figure it out. And there's an essay in here on West Liberty University, which is my alma mater, and still love West Liberty very much. So This essay is called Wheeling Leaves Its Mark on Twain. And although it starts out talking about Mark Twain's visit to Wheeling, it takes a lot of twists and turns, and that's my favorite thing about writing about history. And that's why the book is called Pulling the Thread, Untangling Wheeling History, because it's like, you know, the magician's scarf, where you pull out one and you pull another and you pull another, and next thing you know, you have a pile. And then it's your job as the writer to try to figure out how do we untangle that pile. And so this is the essay. And there are some facts, but mostly it's a story. On January 10th, 1872, one of America's most celebrated storytellers took the stage at Wheeling's Washington Hall. An intelligence reporter described him as, quote, a youngish-looking man of somewhere about 35, not handsome, but having a bright and intelligent look. He was dressed very neatly in a black suit. He is clean-shaven except with a heavy dark mustache, and his manner of wearing his hair, which is very abundant, shows that he is his own tonsorial artist. So in other words, he was kind of an ugly guy with big hair. That's what they had to say about him back then. Although his birth name, of course, was Samuel Clemens, most readers know him as Mark Twain. In his humorous lecture in Wheeling that cold January night nearly 150 years ago is not his only connection to the friendly city. And I have to say, since I've written this, I've learned even more about Mark Twain's visits to Wheeling. He actually had relatives that lived on the island and would come up here and fish and all kinds of other stuff. And this is stuff that people once knew, but has been lost, and now it's my job to find it all over again. By the time Twain took the stage that night, West Virginia had celebrated its 8th statehood anniversary. So West Virginia was still a baby at 8 years old. Twain, his second published travel book, and Washington Hall its 20th year as a place for public assemblies. In fact, Washington Hall is best known as the site of the first Wheeling Convention of the people of northern West Virginia in May of 1861, which eventually led to West Virginia's secession from Virginia during the Civil War. Although the first Washington Hall burned in 1875, it was rebuilt in 1877 and opened its doors to the public with a production of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1878. The records in the Ohio County Public Library's archives, remember them, state that the German Bank of Wheeling bought and extensively remodeled the structure in 1898. Washington Hall still stands in Wheeling today at the northeast corner of 12th and Market Streets and is known, of course, as the Laconia Building. So if you're in Wheeling and you're standing at Vagabond Kitchen, the McClure Hotel is across the street, and then on this corner is the Laconia Building. So if you can imagine where that's all laid out. And so when I read this book on that street in Wheeling, I always say, think of it, Mark Twain was down this very sidewalk. And we know that until very recently, we didn't have our sidewalks replaced since Mark Twain was here. So it's literally the actual sidewalk. Don't tell me where I said that. Anyways, Twain came to town to read from his newly published semi-autobiographical book, Roughing It, which took a humorous look at his adventures in what was then the Nevada Territory. He toured several states that year to read from the work, which the intelligence reporter noted was enjoyed by the audience, quote, of the most intelligent and refined people of the city of Wheeling, if we may judge from the almost continuous laughter and applause that greeted it. And I can never tell while reading these articles if the reporter was being just as much of a smartass as Mark Twain, or if he was being serious. I don't know. Twain enchanted his audience with tales of gold mining, horse wrangling, and real estate speculation during his 6-year trip starting in the early 1860s with his brother, Orion Clemens, who had been appointed secretary of the Nevada Territory. Twain, of course, was no stranger to Wheeling. Known far and wide as a cigar smoker, Twain enjoyed the Marsh Wheeling Toby most of all. And if you've seen the Toby, it's like this tiny cigar. Founded in Wheeling in 1840 by Mifflin Marsh in his early years, the company sold hand-rolled stogies out of market baskets to crews and captains on Ohio River steamboats, as well as Conestoga wagon drivers making their way to the frontier. Eventually, the Marsh-Wheeling stogie was known around the country and enjoyed by many well-known Americans, like Abraham Lincoln, P.T. Barnum, Annie Oakley, and later John Wayne. Notice that those people are all dead. So it might not have been a good product for In his autobiography, Twain writes about his penchant for the well-known smoke. He said, then once more, he would smoke other cigars. He would change off so that I might acquire the subtler flavor of the Marsh Wheeling Toby. I discovered the worst cigars, so-called, are the best for me, after all. And so that was his thoughts on the Marsh Wheeling Toby. Twain, of course, was alluding to the way in which the Wheeling Stogie was made. It was handled with good quality but inexpensive Kentucky tobacco and meant to be affordable for Conestoga drivers who picked them up for as little as 4 for a penny. In fact, the Wheeling Stogie was such a big seller that other manufacturers tried to copy it. According to an article on Archiving Wheeling, the United States Circuit Court decreed in 1895 that only stogies made in Wheeling, West Virginia could be called Wheeling Stogies. So they were so bad, good, who knows, that they were being copied, and they had to actually take some action for that. The Wheeling Register reported that before leaving for his next lecture, which was in Pittsburgh, Twain spent a few hours with a large crowd of Wheeling citizens who were, quote, anxious to make the acquaintance of the man whose pilgrimage had so delighted them. During this social event, he also made reference to his cousin, Sherrard Clemens, which we'll hear more about in a minute, and, quote, other distant relatives in the city, which further delighted the group. So this is a picture of Sherrard Clemens, and he becomes important here in 1 second. That's his cousin. Sherrard Clemens was born and raised and later practiced law in Wheeling. He was elected to represent the Wheeling District in Virginia in the United States House of Representatives to fill a vacancy in 1852. He was later re-elected to the House in 1856, serving from 1857 to 1861. He disagreed with secession. Can you believe that? He didn't want West Virginia to become a state. I automatically didn't like him after that. And made his position known at the Wheeling Convention at Washington Hall in May of 1861. His stature and land ownership resulted in the town of Sherrard in Marshall County to be named after him. So if you're familiar at all with Marshall County, if you go up Route 88, and you keep going towards Cameron, that way, you'll run into the town of Sherrard, which is a small community, but it's still there. They still have school, and they still have businesses and all kinds of houses and things like that. Anyways, that was named after Mark Twain's cousin, and a lot of people don't realize that. That's kind of a cool connection. Sherrard was part of a national scandal. This is my favorite part of the story. In 1858, when he was seriously injured in a duel with O. Jennings, O.B. Wise, newspaper editor and the son of Virginia Governor Henry Wise. Clemens had written an editorial that offended Wise, who was known to be a notorious duelist. After a volley of written exchanges, Clemens invited Wise to a duel. William A. Lake reports in Roots of Secession that the two met on September 17th at a racetrack near Richmond. They both missed their first 3 shots. So here they are, these two guys on the racetrack. They shoot at each other 3 times and miss. But they persist. Why? Anyways, Wise fired his 4th bullet and seriously wounded Clemens. Wise walked away unharmed, although most reports of the duel state that Clemens was shot in his right testicle. Yeah. Other reports argue that the bullet entered his thigh. Either way, his injuries were significant, and it was not long after that he moved to St. Louis, where other members of his family had already settled. According to his obituary, in the May 31st, 1880 St. Louis, Missouri Dispatch, Clemens died after a year-long battle with dropsicle, which is probably just a heart failure. That's what we know it as today. He was destitute, and his friends were caring for him. The writer extols Clemens' public speaking skills and political accomplishments, but notes that he suffered with a lame foot as a result of a duel with Wise. And it makes you wonder, what are they coming up with? In addition, the writer notes that Clemens had a distant relationship with the rest of the St. Louis Clemens clan. He was not well liked by his own family, including his famous cousin Mark. Perhaps as a sardonic nod to his cousin's misfortune, Twain ended his 1872 lecture in Wheeling by decrying dueling as a sin. So after the duel, here's Mark Twain standing in Wheeling saying, dueling is a sin, just as a nod to, he hated his cousin. In his autobiography, Twain writes, I did not know what became of Sherrard Clemens, but once I introduced Senator Joseph Roswell Hawley of Connecticut to a Republican mass meeting in New England, and then I got a bitter letter from Sherrard from St. Louis. He said that the Republicans of the North, quote, the mudsills of the North, had swept away the old aristocracy of the South with fire and sword, and it ill became me, an aristocrat by blood, to train with that kind of swine. So he did not mince words in his letter. Did the doctor, of course, doctor the tablet? That's the next section of this essay. So we've learned now, Mark Twain came to Wheeling, and he did a little reading, and he met some people. He, said some unkind things that were probably true about his cousin Sherrard. We also learned who Sherrard was and his connection to the Ohio Valley. But now things get weirder. Sherrard Clemens' father, James Walton Clemens, is believed by some experts to have forged the Grave Creek stone. If you've ever been to the Grave Creek Mound Archaeological Complex, which used to be called the Duffner Museum, you'll know that they have on display there. You can't really see it if you look at the book later, you can. But they have this little stone that's on display. And, we'll get to that. There's a little stone on display. Wheeling physician and inventor Clemens helped bankroll the 1838 excavation of the mound in Moundsville, just 11 miles from Wheeling. At 69 feet in height and 295 feet in diameter at the time of excavation, the Grave Creek Mound remains one of the largest conical burial mounds in the United States. And in fact, when I was a little girl, we were taught to say the following, and I can still recite it. The mound in Moundsville is the largest conical Indian burial mound east of the Mississippi River. I still, of course, remember it. After all these years, I still remember it. It came up 45. The mound, of course, is a Indian burial mound built during the Woodland period, so that's like 1000 BCE to 1 AD. Was first spotted by European settlers in 1770. And that story, if you don't know it, is wild anyway. So Joseph Tomlinson, one of the early white settlers in Moundsville, was coming back from a hunt, and he had a deer slung over his back, which, have you ever carried a deer out in the woods? I can't imagine. And I can't imagine putting it on my back and walking, dragging it by a couple legs maybe, but anyway, so he's coming home and he's got this deer, and he looks up and he's like, I don't think that's a hill. I think that might be a mound. And that's how he discovered the mound. That's how wooded this area was at that point. It was so heavily wooded that you could have a 69-foot mound in front of you and not even realize it until you finally looked up. So that's how he discovered it. But he was against excavating the mound. Joseph Tomlinson was. And of course, many of his descendants were as well until the 1830s when Jesse and Abelard, which is the best ancient name, right? They believed that it was filled with exotic treasures and they wanted to dig. And so they teamed up with James Walton Clemens, the doctor, for Wheeling, to do that. And Dr. Clemens, of course, was hoping to cash in on some of those discoveries, which is why he helped fund the dig. He was on site for 2 weeks of the excavation and meticulously recorded all findings and other details of that dig. Regrettably, lack of knowledge of archaeological methods led to most of the important information about the mound being lost once the ground was open. And we understand that now because we know more about how to preserve a site. But imagine, these guys were in there with shovels, just digging, not carefully. If you've ever watched a dig or attended one, people are in there with brushes and delicately removing so you can preserve it, but people didn't understand that then. Although skeletons, beads, jewelry, pottery, and other items were found inside the mound, the major treasure Clemens was hoping to find did not reveal itself until laborers began working on the upper vault. An engraved sandstone tablet approximately 1.5 by 2 inches. So we're talking really little. When I was a girl, I imagined this tablet to be this big, right? But when I finally saw the cast, it's like this big. You could miss it. It would be easy to miss. But it was found, reportedly, some people say in the observation notes that it was under a skeleton. Some people say it was in a wheelbarrow full of dirt. It depends on which account you read of that time period. At first, not much was made of this discovery, but the various published write-ups of the dig, including one by Clemens in a publication, and I love this, called Crania Americana in 1839. It's like Big Brain American or something. Encouraged anthropologists and other researchers to get involved in what would become West Virginia's most controversial archaeological find. And even though most archaeologists and people who specialize in this believe it was a forgery, there are still people who think it's a real deal because there were other stones similar found in other places. But most archaeologists today and people who study this think that it was fake. While Clemens did not recoup his investment in the dig, his write-up about the findings made his reputation as a public intellectual grow. Gibson Land Cranmer refers to Clemens in his 1902 book, and this is when we really had great book titles. History of Wheeling City in Ohio County, West Virginia, and Representative Citizens. Like, can you imagine a book being written with this like that long today? That, people want it like flipped, or something, one word on a book, and a title like that as well. Of particular interest, though, are his descriptions of Dr. Clemens' workshop for the production of splints, thermometers, barometers, and surgical instruments, besides other apparatus for scientific purposes. In other words, he had the equipment in his garage to forge this stone, to drill, to carve, to do all the things that were done as a stone. Knowledge of Clemens' private workshop and mechanical abilities led David Oestreicher, an independent scholar from White Plains, New York, to surmise that Clemens forged the stone in his workshop and planted it on the dig site as an effort to increase interest in the Grave Creek Mound and to encourage prospectors to pay to do their own treasure hunting. And we see that still to this day. You can go to Utah right now and search for diamonds. You give them some money, they give you a bucket, you go out and look. Have you heard about this? And people do find diamonds, but most people don't find diamonds. And if they do, the tiny diamonds that, aren't worth looking for. Central to Oestreicher's hypothesis in a paper he presented to the West Virginia Archaeological Society in 2008 is the discovery of the 1752 book. Wait for it, it's another long title, it's even longer. An essay on the alphabets of unknown letters that are found in the most ancient points and monuments of Spain. I had to take an extra breath on that. Oestreicher claims that Clemens would have had this book in his library because he was such an engaged reader and thinker. Upon examination of the book, Oestreicher found that the same symbols and errors, and that's important, it wasn't just the symbols, but it was also the errors made, were found in the inscriptions on the Grave Creek stone, which further supports his hypothesis that Clemens forged the stone. And most people, again, agree with this. There are people who know that. All that remains, of course, is a photo of the actual stone, taken in 1878, located in a collection at the British Museum. 4 casts of the stone in the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History Archives, and a wax impression of the stone in the National Anthropological Association's collection. So in other words, we don't have the stone anymore. Nobody knows where it is, and this is my second favorite part of the story. So I went digging around. I called the British Library. I'm like, hey, I'm coming over. Do you and the British Library, British Museum, happen to have this stone? Can I take a look at that? And they were like, we don't have that, and we've never had that. We have no record of it. But then other people think that the Smithsonian or something is dishonest and maybe they kept it. And I don't know, but the best thing was this. So I met a descendant of the Tomlinson clan, and she said that stone was actually taken to Arizona when part of that clan moved out there. And I don't know, but man, I would do anything. Can you imagine if I found that stone? First of all, I wouldn't tell anybody. And secondly, I poured it. But imagine finding that stone. And by the way, I once dated one of the Tomlinson family members just because I wanted to find out what the stone was. It's a long time ago. And I didn't tell him that. So, back to the story. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, who borrowed his pseudonym Mark Twain from riverboat culture, meaning, of course, the water was 12 feet deep and therefore safe for passage, was known far and wide as a brilliant teller of tall tales. Although his connections to Wheeling might seem minimal, they read in a sense like some of his stories, humorous, tangled, and somewhat unbelievable. One thing is certain, Wheeling left its mark on Mark Twain. In a letter to his beloved wife, Olivia, written on the night of his lecture at Washington Hall, he wrote, quote, "Livy, darling, it was perfectly splendid, no question about it. The livest, quickest audience I almost ever saw in my life." That's it. Thank you for listening. Do you have questions about this story? Yes.
Have you ever heard a rumor of people that are seeking the stone?
Yes.
As the rain comes and erodes creeks and areas around the riverbank, of people that are seeking the stone? I've heard that rumor.
Yes, just like the Celeron plates from Wheeling, that are buried. There are people that
Yeah.
go out and search when there's a flood or when there's water coming down, they'll go out and search for that stone. Because people do want to find it. People are really curious about it. Like, is it real? Is it not? And even if most people think it's real, how cool would it be to actually find it? You know, and look at it and hold it in their own hand. I mean, I would be the envy of like 5 people if I had that. But it would be like the best thing ever. I keep thinking I'm going to stumble into a drugstore one day, into St. Vincent's or something, and go,
Another thing too.
$1.99.
Have you ever heard of how the mound was built to 69 feet?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so I don't know if you all know the story, but it was carried in basket load by basket load over many years, hundreds of years of packing it in. And so sometimes it would be baskets or whatever cloth, but as things changed over time, more dirt was added, Though the people at the mound, the people who run the mound and who work at the mound complex say what's left of the mound now is really not much of it is original.
Really?
Yes, because it's been excavated, torn apart, reconstructed, and, you know, I mean, there was once a saloon on the mound, and I always think, imagine this, you're drunk at the saloon, and it's 69 feet to the bottom. I mean, imagine that, you stumble out and you fall, and you just stumble down the side of the mountain. You have to really, really believe in yourself to do something. I can imagine it. But they, you know, we had Christmas trees and all kinds of crazy things on the mountain. I grew up in Moundsville, I live in Raleigh now, but, yes. Right. Any other questions about anything about Mark Twain? And I'm learning more as I look at deeper into the archives, and this is something you should know. If you do online archival research, like our newspapers or any other kind of archives, as they improve, their search features improve. And so even if you searched for something before and couldn't find anything, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep like going back and searching again, even using those same search terms, because you'll find new stuff. I find new stuff all the time, which is always exciting. I'm working on volume 2 of this book, so I'm really excited about that. And there's an essay in there about the Ethan Allen statue that used to be in our library, and a whole bunch of other, I think, fun things. David Scrub was from Wheeling, but he grew up in Moundsville. So, yes. Question?
Have you ever done any writing on the Zane family?
A little bit. I mean, Betty's on the cover.
Okay.
But I haven't invested a lot in it.
Do you know who John McIntyre is?
No.
Who married Ebenezer Zane's daughter?
No.
Okay. There's an interesting story. It originates in Zanesville. And it involves John McIntyre having fathered a child. John McIntyre was the fellow that set up Zanesville, endowed the public library in Zanesville. And he married Ebenezer Zane's daughter. But Ebenezer didn't attend the wedding ceremony because he was against the marriage. And when I was doing some research in Zanesville for some writing that I did, I came across the story of two of the old librarians that were up in the genealogy study. And John McIntyre apparently fathered a child to someone other than Ebenezer's daughter.
Oh, yes.
And that child was raised, because John McIntyre died, that child was raised by McIntyre's wife. But it was my understanding that the child had a difficult life and died in Wheeling at about 20 years of age.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just curious as to whether or not you've ever come across that story, because I've always been interested in knowing why did she die, why did she in Wheeling.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if you could find her in a newspaper or find her in some other records.
It's in the family tree of the genealogical tree of the same family.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, and you know, one thing that story obviously highlights is that people think that only people today have done wrong things or done, immoral things. And no, it's a history of humanity. It's in real ways, people, we do things. Any other
Maybe
questions?
you can untangle that.
Yeah, right, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, Christina, through your book, we've learned a lot about Wheeling history we didn't know before.
Yeah.
There's several things. Number one, I did not realize the corner of 12th and Market Street was the site of the founding of West Virginia
Yeah.
that you mentioned as Washington Hall. And nor did I realize that when you said it burned, and what is now the Laconia building was built by the German Bank of Wheeling.
Yes.
And the German Bank of Wheeling was owned by Henry Schulmbach, who was a beer magnate in Wheeling. And the original German Bank of Wheeling is currently Westbanco Bank.
Is this?
Yes.
German bank.
See, I knew the Schwalbach
The
connection.
German
but
bank,
I didn't-
pardon me?
I knew the Schwalbach connection, but I didn't realize
Yeah.
that, so it became eventually West Bank.
He eventually became Westbanco. Another thing about Schulmbach, which is very interesting, is of course, he had a huge brewing company in Wheeling on 33rd Street. And does everybody know where Kennedy Hardware is?
Yeah.
Okay. And right across 33rd Street, there's a big building, which was a foundry and what. That was the brew, where they brewed the beer. But Kennedy Hardware store now was the carriage house for all their carriages to deliver the beer. And below, in the basement part, they had the horses on the street level, where all the wagons were, and they kept the hay up above.
Wow. And I don't know if it was Schwalbach or another brewer that had an underground cellar that had a natural spring that naturally kept the beer cold. And it saved them so much money. I don't know if it was Schwalbach or another brewer, but I studied that before.
That probably was Schulbach because that was in caves.
Yeah.
And the caves were right across where the factory went all the way back to the hillside. And a lot of it was taken out by Route 2.
And a lot of those early businesses were just so remarkable in the fact that they wanted to be completely self-sufficient. You know, like Wheeling Steel was like that, when it was all these different pieces, but they had their own coal mine. Astoria Glass, which is what my next book that I'm working on now is about, they had their own coal mine, they had their own gas deposits, they made their own bricks that they used for their kilns to make glass. They made everything on site that they could possibly make. They of course had the railroad that came right through to pick up the glass and ship it. They were very, very efficient, unlike sometimes modern businesses where you need all these different outsources of people to just make a product and get it to where it's going. I've always admired that sort of self-sufficient part of businesses from the past.
Well, most of the glass made in Wheeling, they were self-sufficient, totally.
Oh, yes.
Had their own foundries and everything else.
And I'm going to take a moment to plug something. So I've been working very dedicated on April 2025, so next month, in Wheeling, it's Wheeling Glass Heritage Month. And we have, I believe, 14 different things to do next month to celebrate our glass heritage. And one of them is touring Item Molding Machine, one of them is touring the OB Glass Museum, and there will be 2 guided tours. All of these are free, by the way, because we have great partners. We're also doing a stained glass tour of Wheeling churches led by Friends of Wheeling. And you can find that if you go to glasstakesoverwheeling.com. You'll find all of our stuff, and everything is free to everybody. So come see us. We're doing readings at the library. The library itself is they have a museum in there, and that is all dedicated to glass being produced in the valley. We've got some people coming in to talk about glass making, so it's really good. So, and lots of exhibits. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. You're a great audience.
Really like the Wheeling Stogie because one stogie would last them one day of driving.
Yeah, I heard about that. I think that's so cool.
I do have a question.
What's it? Just have you do the drawing. Yeah.